Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of Blindsight. I'm your host, Bill Lundgren, and with us is, again, Darren Zenger. I'll get it one of these days. Sorry. He is a counselor, advisor, and has been sharing a lot of wisdom with us. It's very important for people who are looking to improve their situation, I guess is a good general word. The 12 steps is one way that we can take a look at ourselves and find better ways of operating. And what we're going to be talking about today is step 4, which for a lot of people is very intimidating. And so, Darren, if you want to take a moment to explain to us what step 4 is all about.
Well, step 4 is calling the moral or the inventory. We're taking an inventory of ourselves in different areas of our lives and different aspects of what we're dealing with. I mean, the first piece is your resentments, these things that we resent towards people, places, or things. And then we have the fears inventory, which really open us to look at what are our fears as we try to make these steps going forward. And then we have the sexual inventory, and then there's the assets inventory of, what do we have and what's being impacted in our lives as we move forward. And this step I really like to work with my clients on, because it kind of helps me get into more of the nitty gritty of why are we using substances to numb ourselves, to avoid what we need to talk about, the traumas, the hurt, and the anger. And so this allows me as a therapist to kind of dig in and be able to examine those things right under the hood.
And what kind of things do you find under the hood?
Well, I mean, I really like, the resentments pieces is what those are, because we look at, okay, what am I resentful to? Maybe there's something that happened in my childhood, for example. Mm-hmm. I resent maybe a classmate because he picked on me, and I'm resentful of that person. And I, a lot of times we go into this victim mode or victim stance where we blame others for our problems.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Without taking a step back and say, what is my actual ownership in this piece? The big book always talks about, keeping your side of the street clean. What is my part in this? Mm-hmm. And that's scary, because a lot of times people don't want to do self-reflection and look at themselves, because they're like, oh crap, I have to take accountability for some of these things here. And that's hard and scary.
Well, when you're taking an inventory, are you writing it down, or is it, kind of itemizing it? And does the inventory just talk about the negative stuff, or do we, like someone in a grocery store is taking an inventory, they're looking at what they have versus what they don't have? Right.
And I think it does both. I mean, we look at seriously obviously the negative consequences of our behaviors. We look at that. But I also think of, our moral inventory and our values inventory is we look at this and we say, wait a minute, my substance use took me away from what I valued. Mm-hmm. And then I can use that So what behaviors do I need to change so my behaviors align with my values and what I believe to be? And that's the beautiful thing about step 4 is you're able, like you said, look at the good things that you disconnected with because of addiction.
Well, do you give people a writing assignment to take that inventory?
Yeah, at Circle Arts we do have questions. We write down the people we resent, and we look at in the fears as well as we look at how has this affected our personal relationships, our sexual relationships, or whatever, and then look at what is the exact nature of my part in this and what happened here. And then when we look at values, what do you value? If I value honesty, what are the behaviors that need to change so you can realign yourself? So yeah, you make a list of that, and then we work on identifying what behaviors that are maladaptive so that we can get
Mm.
aligned that way and keep moving forward.
Well, I know a lot of times human nature, we look at negative things and say, "Oh, that because of so and so or such and such," and then that's
Mhm.
the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, we do that because we as humans, it's shameful for us to look at, did I really have a part in this? Well, you do. I mean, maybe it's a simple thing to realize. I always share this story. If you're going to hang around a barbershop, you're eventually going to get a haircut. But if you didn't intend to get a haircut, then maybe you should have left the barbershop.
Well, true.
And so I use that analogy with everything that we do. You could have done something, but maybe you didn't have the skills necessary to do it back then. And so now you come into therapy or working step 4 and, trying to make those behavioral changes. It's neither good or bad. It just is. And the thing I like about step 4 is that step 4 is a step that takes a while, Yeah, and somebody's got to, I feel like that taking step 4 takes time because it takes time to think and process all of these things and really understand what our part is in this. And that's why we work with a sponsor weekly is so our sponsors can help us look at this and look at it objectively from a different perspective. And it's really, really hard to not do step 4 without taking things personal because it just is. And so we got to take a step back and look at it objectively.
Well, so what you're talking about taking a step, doing the inventory with a sponsor or therapist or something like that, or are we supposed to shut ourselves in a room and write and see what comes out?
Right. And sometimes, we could see what does come up in it. And, when somebody is doing step 4, like I said, we have a guide, a template where people can look at, what it is, and sometimes people just don't know where they have resentments or that they have this falsehood. Well, I don't resent that because that's done in the past. I don't want to dig it up.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to recognize we still put that on because even though it may not bother us today, it definitely did exhibit some behaviors in some form or another. And so it's important to recognize just how much these things did impact us, even though right now they kind of, I think that's the beauty with step 4 is you may not identify all your resentments if we're focusing on that as you start to heal and you start to be aware, when you work step 4 again, you have a few more resentments that come up. And so it's just this ever continuing process that, I believe that your body knows what it needs to heal. And so as you start healing with some of these resentments, when you do step 4 again, the other ones are going to start coming up, and you're able to be more equipped to manage some of these deeper resentments.
Well, I know I've had clients that have done several inventories because each time they do it, the new stuff comes up.
Exactly.
And we not intentionally blocked it, but it just stayed hidden because sometimes what comes up may be so threatening that there's a part of us that keeps it stifled until we're capable of handling that material that comes up.
Right. And that's why always, in my, professional perspective is, you want to be working with your therapist as some of these stuff goes up, because, some stuff might be so raw and vulnerable
Right.
that you just don't know what to do with it. But having a therapist or a counselor help you navigate that is going to be extremely helpful, because your sponsor is not a therapist or a counselor, but they can help you be there for support, and like that higher power concept. They're there to help you as one of your resources. But if you don't have the skills to manage maybe some of these resentments as sexual trauma or other types of physical or emotional trauma, I mean, that's hard and it's scary. Most people feel like if they have to bring that up, they're going to relive it. But if they're equipped with the proper resources, then going through this is going to be so much easier and better.
Yeah, because that's precisely what keeps us stuck, is not being able to address the big picture. How was it for you when you made the decision to do an inventory?
For me, when I did my inventory, I had to look out for what was my piece. I think that was my aha moment, is what was I doing that was creating a disconnect from my kids and my ex-wife. I had to take a step back. I had to look at that, examine it, and acknowledge it. I mean, it was shameful to say the least.
Right.
And I can talk about it, but it's a reminder of where I was and where I don't want to go back to.
Sure.
And so it's just acknowledging my piece here, because I grew up with a character defect of perfectionism. That was what I had to do, because being deaf and blind, I had to do everything perfect. I had to go up and beyond better than anybody else, because I felt like if I wanted to make a splash, I had to be this perfect disabled person and try to be accepted by my peers, and that was hard. And so I think that that correlation ties into my sex and pornography issue when I was dealing with that, because I didn't know what to do with those emotions.
Right. And that was real hard to deal with.
Yeah, it was just trying to, what am I doing? I'm feeling all this uncomfortable, painful emotions, and sex and pornography give you a high euphoria. I wanted to feel connected. I wanted to feel something other than what I was feeling.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. But the question I have, as I'm thinking about the process, is what was it that helped you to accept that you had to look at your part of it? Because, a lot of people, certainly when when they start a fourth step, they still might want to blame everybody else and take an inventory of what everybody did to us.
Right. And that was that piece is that awareness. I take a step back that I allowed that to affect me the way it did. And I had choice that, you know, crap, you know, addiction is where people are feeling self-centered, right? And so I'm
Right.
selfish about me, and I'm not really considering about how this is affecting those that I love and around them or hurting them because I'm isolating. And that was my aha moment, is that I had to get uncomfortable, do something different, because it was my value to be a good dad and be present with my kids. And so I had to start changing. It was hard. And even today, it's still hard. It's easy for me to zone out because maybe there's a bunch of kids yelling around and hard for me to engage. So I have to keep myself in check so that I can, be present for my kids. That was that process, is I have to remind myself to be present. Because otherwise I know I'll go back in this to old patterns of behavior.
So we always have to remind ourselves to be present, because the temptation is to slip back or to be somewhere else.
Exactly, because that's what we do. We have to be present and see what's coming up. If I'm getting triggered, the only way I'm going to be aware of that trigger is if I'm present. If I'm not present, then I have no awareness over it. And that's important to me. And then I think the same thing with step 2, and even step 1 to a degree, is I own how I'm feeling, and I'm telling people that this is overwhelming for me. I don't want to blame anybody else for my feelings. It's easy to do this and just create awareness with my support people so that I can, don't build up resentments, because it's not their fault. They're kids. And it goes back into this idea, okay, my character defect, we're jumping up to step 6 here a little bit, of being perfectionist. And I have that expectation that all my kids need to be that way like I was. And I think the hard part with step 4 for me also was to own that I was wrong. I can't let my childhood trauma kind of push over into my kids' life, and own that piece and make sure I am addressing that.
And that perfectionism that you talked about in step 3 will crop up, because that's old history, but it's a trigger for you. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it is. And so I got to be extremely mindful of this, and not let my shame talk get to the best of me. And I think that's where, working on your resentments. What is it, your piece on this? And for me is to own my shame talk and know what it is, and be able to challenge that shame talk and recognize, okay, this has nothing to do with anybody else, but this has to do with me, and be able to challenge those and reach out to my higher power to help me get through that.
So part of it is knowing, what do you want to call it? Do you want to call perfectionism a character defect?
Yeah. I know that's one of my character defects.
Okay. So knowing that then, and knowing that it may not go away, but we have to be conscious of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's like, step 5 is to admit our wrongs in our doings to another person, then step 6 really dives into character defects and identifying those things. So we go into step 7 where we can ask God to remove these character defects.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, like I said, all these steps build up on each other.
right.
I think step 6 and 7 are really connected to step 4 because it brings this awareness in. Now we can do our work of being aware of our character defects and take some ownership of our own behavior instead of blaming others for things. I don't know what happened to some of the kids in my school growing up, if what kind of their family, dynamics, why they were acting out, and subsequently it impacted me. So I have to be mindful, take a step back and kind of put my feet in their shoes. And that's hard because I want to say, screw you, this is what you did to me. But being able to be present, take a step back, that was probably the hardest part about step 4.
Absolutely. And you had talked about part of the perfectionism coming from the fact that you had disabilities and you were trying to be perfect. Yeah. And then it started getting in your way, in essence. So now you have to look at that perfectionism and say, wait a minute, that has to do with the past. It has to do with the way, in a sense, it's kind of a survival skill.
Exactly. It was.
As you saw it.
It was a defense mechanism. And a lot of times, because we're protecting ourselves from whatever it is that's making us feel uncomfortable. And so we gotta, deconstruct those defense mechanisms. Why do they come up? And that's where, like I say, with step 4, do my fears. Okay, I'm going to go through my fears inventory. What am I afraid of? And for that piece was, I was afraid of being accepted for who I am. I struggle with people telling me what I can and can't do. And it's like, okay, I'm deaf and blind, but you can't do this. Well, screw that. I'm going to show you. So I had that kind of attitude, and I had to keep that attitude in check. And that was where my fear was, is anger, because all I want to do is be a normal human being.
Right.
And so, I had to start reframing and looking at things from a different paradigm than within my myopic perspective.
So how do you view this perfectionism now? Kind of, you have the cochlear implant, so one thing has been somewhat mitigated. With blindness, there's not much you can do, but by golly, looking at you as a clinician, as someone who's doing the things you're doing and, being looked up at, I'm sure, at this point, is that part of what mitigates the perfectionism that you once had?
Well, I think I think that I had to still continue to work on that perfectionism because, I didn't get cochlear implants until I was in my 30s.
Yeah.
So this is years and years and years of neural pathways created this way, and so even today I still struggle with that perfectionism and learning to be and know that I'm good enough. And that's also one of my fears. I'm not good enough,
Right.
I tell myself this narrative when I was dating. It says, who the hell wants to marry a deaf and blind guy when the next guy next door has a truck and can see and drive and all this kind of stuff. And so I got to challenge my thinking errors and pull my head out of the sand, if you will, and recognize that maybe that's not true. And I had a roommate tell me that at once. He says, Darren, you need to stop that because there's other characteristics. So you do have the people like you. And that was one of the things I resented. I could easily resent being blind, but I had to own my own feelings and own that this wasn't anything else I could project it out and blame God or blame whoever. But I had to take a step back and look at where was this coming from? And there was this idea of inadequacy and not good enough. And then I had to shift my thinking and work on, gratitude of what I do have and not what I don't have. And that's huge in recovery.
How did you do that?
I had to trust my roommate. I had to trust him that he was telling me the truth. I can go back to step 3. I had to trust that process and see what happens. And sure enough, it was there. And then I would ask people, I was easily able to weed out people. I would tell them straight up. Some people were uncomfortable, and that's okay. And I had to tell myself if they didn't want to go on a date with me, that has everything to do with them and has nothing to do with me. It just sucks because they didn't get an opportunity to get to know me as a human being and challenge the thinking that maybe this is about their own inadequacies and has nothing to do with me. I had to trust that process and really shift my thinking and my understanding around me. And that was hard.
Yes, it is hard because we think, oh, it's because how we are, that's why they are responding to us, and to change the thinking. You say, wait a minute, that has more to say about them than me. It's a grand leap.
Right. And we create these biases based on our experiences because whether, our biases, like I said, make us comfortable and give ourselves a pat on the back, but that may not be true. And so we need to, take a step back and really look into whether that's serving us well or not. I think that's where the resentment's coming from. What are we doing? Is it serving us well? What is it trying to protect? And then dive in and unpack what is it protecting you of. And a lot of times it's, people didn't feel safe. And then it could be a developmental piece for them to be able to find out what they didn't get, with safety, for example, is a huge one. I didn't feel safe around this person. What do you need to give yourself so you can feel safe and build up your own confidence? So
in other words, instead of trying to change them, you're building your confidence and say the safety comes from within me.
Yeah, exactly. And I work with a lot of relationships with couples or families. Is if you want to change something in a relationship, the best place to start is within yourself.
Yeah.
Because you'd be surprised if you do something different, you'll get a different response. And it doesn't matter if it's your fault or not. If you want a different response by somebody else, you have to do something different. And that's what I think what step 4, doing the inventory, is. If you want different responses with all these things that are bad, we have to be willing to respond to those things in a different way that's healthy.
And I guess it comes back to what we talk about, that we can't change anybody else.
Right.
We can only change ourselves.
And that's the only, that's the only thing that we can control is our reaction, learning to respond to something as opposed to reacting to something.
Mm-hmm. Action instead of reacting.
Yeah, exactly. Because, we're on the manageable because we say, screw this and go grab a beer and we're good. We numb this out because that's all we learn. But now we have to face these fears and deal with the emotions of why we do things. Then, when we have that awareness, then we can make the changes.
And that's part of the inventory.
Exactly. Because if we don't look at these things, then, go back to the values. If I have a sexual, addiction, porn addiction, or whatever, if my value is to be, monogamous, then, that strayed me away from my value. And I don't see that because I have infidelity or something like that. And then I've got to take a step back and realign my behavior back to my value.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just using that as an example that I see happen often. And if I value honesty, then I got to start being honest with myself, and then reevaluate what is it it's going to take to build honesty. Because I always tell people consistency over time equals trust. Starts with you, your consistent behavior, time. The universe controls time. The other person can give you trust. And so unless we look at these inventories, start shifting it, then we can start building trust back.
So one of the things that's real important for us to do as part of the inventory is to say, these are my values.
Yeah.
Because that's where we start from. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think that's kind of the roadmap, right? If I have values of something being honest, then that's what it is. Then I need to behave in a manner that aligns with that value. If my value is to be on time, then I need to change my behaviors to watch for the time, account for traffic, and show up when I'm supposed to. We don't think about all these other things. I can say, hey, I value time, being on time, but if I'm not practicing that, then I'm not really in alignment with that. Maybe we need to look at that value and find out if that's truly your value or not.
So what I'm hearing you say is that that's certainly one of the signs that addiction is when you realize that, or what you've been through as an addict, or whatever reason you're going into doing this fourth step, that blocked your being the kind of person that you want to be.
Exactly.
The values that you hold, but we're not performing.
Right. And it's like, okay, what happened to start drifting away from your true self is what I like to call it.
Mm-hmm.
What is your true self? Who are you? How can we reconnect you to your true identity? And that's what I think the inventory really helps us separate those things. And man, it's almost like dissecting into every aspect of your life and trying to sew you back up. And oh my gosh, it's so mentally exhausting that, I think that's where one of the avoidance is. It is mentally exhausting because it really is.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that whether we're involved in addiction, but if we're just in life, I wonder how often we ask ourselves, what are my true values? We go through life assuming certain things, but do we, in general, ask ourselves, do an inventory, regardless, of what's going on,
Right.
to do an inventory on our values and whether we follow them or not? It sounds like something we should all be doing frequently, a fourth step frequently,
Right.
to keep ourselves centered.
And sometimes it's like, well, what do you mean by values? And then so it's like, okay, what is important to you that's a principle?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I reframe it in that way, it's, oh, okay, that makes sense. If I value autonomy, then okay, what are you going to do to value that autonomy? If you value being honest, okay, then what are some of the behaviors that we need to do to not be honest that shows in the forms of manipulation? And if it's important for me to be on time, what is it that's making me late? Take ownership of that. That's the hard part. And we can,
Sure.
and so I ask people, what is important to you? So they can make that list. And then maybe in another session, it's like, okay, if these are our, values for you, take a step back. What are those behaviors that need to change so that you're congruent in both mind and body and action?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scary piece, because it's like,
Yes.
because it only reinforces the shame talk. Oh, I messed up. I'm a dumbass or whatever. And so we got to be careful how we do this and keep it all in line with the keep the shame talk in check. So we're not talking about the past. We can, but we're trying to move to the forward to the future. What do you want your future self to be?
As opposed to what's been.
Yes.
What do you want to keep? What do you want to throw out in terms of what you've been doing?
Because I think that's the hard piece is it's so uncomfortable to think of what it could be. I think of this analogy of the an elephant. You have a baby elephant who's training in the circus, and the elephant handler whips him in the butt, and that's all they know is that behavior. They go in a circle, even though they have all the strength, that they don't know they can break that chain, break free from that. But that's all they know. And so when it gets into something that's freeing, it's uncomfortable because they don't know what that looks like. And so it's scary. And so we stay stuck in our old patterns of behavior because that is what is comfortable. And all the more why we need a sponsor, why we need a higher power to help us move from point A to point B so we can continue to move forward.
Great. On that note, I think we have to close this session. And I really appreciate the time and effort that you provided us in helping us understand those steps, and also give us an opportunity, whoever we are, to look at ourselves and say, okay, what have I learned? What do I need to do? So I'll ask you again, what are your last thoughts to offer?
I think the biggest thing is to love yourself. That's the big thing, it's okay that we made mistakes. The difference between shame and guilt is shame, I am bad. Guilt, I did something bad. I made a poor choice. And shifting into a place of guilt will also allow us to shift in a place of improvement. And as we do the inventories, as we look at our resentments, we take ownership of this thing. It's not harder than it is. I mean, it's scary. Yeah, absolutely. But you have nothing to fear but fear itself. And if you got a lot of support to get through that, a lot of that fear is just the unknown. And there's a lot of people that are out there to help you and want to help you.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Darren, for being on the show. To our audience, thank you for listening in. Next week, we'll be doing step 5, and we'll be carrying on the discussion of looking at ourselves and what we need to do to improve. This is Bill Lundgren, Blindsight, and remember feedback. We can get feedback by 720-712-8856 or through our hotline, feedback@aftersight.org. Look forward to having you tune in next week. Thank you, Darren, and thank you all.
Thank you.